So we're talking about the LA fires,
Mhm.
most of which are mostly contained. However, we did have a new fire start today, January 22nd, and it's already at 8,000 acres.
Mhm.
This is the most recent, largest fire that we've had
Yeah.
in a few weeks, as Palisades and Eaton have gone under control for the most part. We are restarting this experience yet again. And so, what role does leadership play in something like a natural disaster? Because we live in a society and because we are subject to a governing body, we generally define leadership as those who decide on policy. And these policies, of course, are meant to keep society in order and keep us safe, right?
Mhm.
You know what I think is ironic is that when I was researching for this episode and I was looking up points about leadership, I came across a public opinion poll from last year by the LA Times. And this poll showed that 68% of LA residents, which is what, 10 million people?
Yeah.
68% of LA residents believe local leaders are unprepared for wildfire emergencies.
That's crazy.
Wildly ironic,
Yeah.
considering just 2 years later, we saw exactly that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So why then were these leaders unprepared? What made them unprepared? Why couldn't they have not prevented these wildfires from happening, but at least done something to help mitigate the destruction? Where did we go wrong? Where did they go wrong? We voted them in,
Mhm.
assuming you did vote. So why didn't they do what they were supposed to do? I would say that there is a greater force at play that actually supersedes the people's interest
Mm.
and
You're getting somewhere.
the governing body's purpose. And I think that is money and those who have money. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Who has the most money in a capitalistic society?
You would assume it'd be politicians,
Right.
but they don't.
No.
They have money, but not on the scale you think that, like Elon Musk level money.
Yeah.
They're nowhere near that. For example, the president, the highest person,
Yeah.
they make. Don't quote me on this, but it's like doctor money.
Yeah.
So they make good money, but this is a president.
Yeah.
But they are in a position of power.
Power.
It's a long ladder of power, but past a certain point, you have some kind of influence. You can speak to someone, you can speak to the person above you. There are things you can do all along that ladder. So it's a 2-for-1. So you're in a position of power, but also like you give me X amount of money and now I'm a little richer and I'll make that thing happen for you. So this is where you quickly have the intersection of money and politics.
Yeah.
And other countries are getting closer to solving that, but the United States is like way behind.
Yeah. Another way of looking at politics is just by calling it power. So the intersection of money and power. Who stands at the intersection of money and power? I think two groups of people. One is politicians, and two, institutions or private interests, or AKA those with the money. You just said they have money, but not as much as Elon, who is literally the face of private interest.
And while as rich as he is, he doesn't have, he does now, but for the most part, they don't have direct institutional power.
He's not supposed to have direct institutional power.
No one.
He's not supposed to. He's only in the place that he is in the government, first of all, which is a made up institution, right?
Just for him.
Trump made up an institution just for him and his buddy to feel like they have power over something. Whether they do or not remains to be seen in the next 4 years.
Yeah.
But it's plain as day to see how he got there.
Yeah.
Records show he's the largest donor to the Republican Party in history.
Fact check. If we consider historical contributions over a longer time frame, Sheldon and Miriam Adelson are indeed the largest individual donors to the Republican Party. Between 2010 and 2020, they donated over $500 million to Republican campaigns and super PACs. This surpasses the contributions of Elon Musk, whose large donation in the 2024 cycle was roughly $275 million. Still, that doesn't mean that he won't be within the years to come.
All because of the 2024 campaign election.
Yeah.
So Nothing is getting done because of power and money. Another interesting fact I wanted to point out in this was how just 2 years ago, the Wall Street Journal did an investigation into the private interests of specifically the utility companies like PG&E here in California. They did an investigation and found that PG&E was liable for previous wildfires due to infrastructure negligence.
Oh, shit.
And if you remember any of the fires that had happened in the last 5 years in California, you might remember, a lawsuit that took place. I think it was maybe against Edison because it was found that, I don't know, it was one of their wires that or transformers that blew up that started like a really major fire.
Mm.
And now we're hearing that the possible cause for the Eaton fire could have been a downed electrical wire. Why is it, or rather, how is it that this private company was able to overshadow public safety with pure negligence? How are they able to do that?
I think to get there, we have to go to like, why would they not have these safety precautions in place? For me, there's always been this conflict between safety and profit. You can go back to like the early 1900s. The reason why we have like fire exits, they weren't always there. We have them there now because there were fire hazards at certain places and there wasn't an emergency route to leave said building. This is an entire case, but there's one incident where the employer insisted their employees not leave the building under any circumstances. Something catches on fire, and because there was no emergency route, they all burned down with the building. And that's kind of how we get some of the fire and safety laws we have today. That mentality hasn't changed. They still don't care about their employees and will only do the bare minimum to protect people. But it's one of the many ways they can cut costs. So at the end of it, it's about maximizing profits. So let's say, I'm going to make something up. If you sell an item, most of the money comes from you selling the thing. If it does well and people like it, people buy it. But they're always scheming about ways as to how they can make more money. So you charge more for it. Shrinkflation, you shrink the amount of it while still charging that same amount. So now people need to buy more of that thing.
Yeah.
That's a direct way of doing it. But another way is you cut all these like small little corners that really don't need to be cut. But again, this is where like supreme, well, I was about to say supreme greed, but the word really is capitalism.
Yeah.
That is the word.
Yeah, it is.
So under a capitalistic society, you'll have companies and employers looking for any little way to cut costs, to increase their profit margin. And one of them is safety, which is fucking insane. So because it costs money to maintain things, anything.
Yeah, it does.
It costs money to do that.
Yes.
And the larger the infrastructure, the larger the company, those dollars that get put into that go up. Not impossible at all, but it just costs money. So that's an area where, along with them scamming you by making your product smaller while not changing the price of said product, another area where in their minds they're like, you know what, we've done the bare minimum to make sure this thing functions as it should. That's enough.
Going back to what you said earlier about how fire exits didn't exist before, it reminds me of that book that we had to read in high school called The Jungle. Do you remember that?
Oh, vaguely.
The Jungle by Upton Sinclair is probably the one piece of literature that single-handedly led to U.S. food safety reforms, right? Because you had this person who went and investigated and then wrote about the disgusting oppression and filth that was going on in Chicago's meatpacking district, and by doing so, was able to inform the public about these unfair standards, and then in turn, that caused a bunch of reforms to happen. So, yeah, throughout history,
So you can see why they want to ban certain books.
but throughout history, you could see that through capitalistic structures, safety has never been a priority until it becomes law. So why hasn't the upkeep of these infrastructures become law?
There's two parts of that, essentially. One is, the company aside, the politicians that we have in place are usually in contact with these companies, we'll put it that way. So a lot of the times they've been told, like, you know what, don't worry about it. It's already been maintained. Just, Shh.
You know what that is, right? There's a real word for that.
What's the word?
It's called lobbying.
Talk to him.
It's called lobbying.
Talk to him.
In case anybody listening to this doesn't know what lobbying is,
Talk to them.
lobbying is when a company, right, underlying company, hires representatives to influence lawmakers to pass or block legislation in their favor. And this is totally legal. That's why I just gave you a word for it. Lobbying.
Mm-hmm.
It's out there right in the public. You could find data on how much money companies spend to lobby for policies and laws to be put in place for their favor. It's all a money game, right? These companies spend millions and millions and millions of money to essentially avoid regulations that oftentimes prioritize public safety or the security of financial wealth, financial freedom. And they often do it under the guise of costs or feasibility issues within that company because they want to protect their assets. And so they give policymakers millions and millions of dollars to essentially say, well, listen to us,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because money talks.
Mm-hmm.
So as a result, you have these industries who are influencing the very agencies that were created in the first place to regulate them.
Yeah.
Which then, in turn,
fail us
through weaker oversight.
Yeah.
I don't think that this can be seen any more obviously than through oil and gas companies who are constantly lobbying against stricter environmental laws, specifically in the midst of climate change, of climate threats
that they caused.
I mean, just 2 years ago, you can Google California Air Resources Board, a board specifically created to track the metric tons of CO2 that California as a whole releases into the air. Just 2 years ago, 2023, wildfires alone in California released over 100 million metric tons of CO2 in 1 year. And I should have looked it up I don't even know how soon you can get those numbers, but I'm sure that just within the first 3 weeks of 2025, that we're a good percentage of the way to that record in 2023.
The other reason how we get to immediate like policy change and reform and all that stuff is through direct pressure. So on one hand, as you said earlier, you have lobbying that goes on. The other hand, direct pressure, whether it's through voting or through literally en masse telling your governing bodies, make this change.
And every policy they make without direct pressure is absolutely stupid. I.e. TikTok ban. Like they're just sitting around thinking that they know what's wrong with America. And oftentimes some of the best policies are enacted through public pressure.
Every single one you can think of that we take for granted was done through direct pressure. So that's why, like, if you have a restaurant, your shit has to be sanitary. Otherwise, you get shut down. That's why every building you're in has to have an emergency exit, no matter what it is. We can go on, but point being, you get to these through direct action.
Yeah. As much as politicians love money, they also love power.
Yeah.
Which is why they're there in the first place. They want to remain in power, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so oftentimes they'll fold under pressure because they're backed into this corner. And, that's where I feel like the largest sense of democracy is felt in our modern day culture, right? I think a lot of people will tell you, or we don't live in a democracy. We just live, we live in a representative republic, which is true. And we really don't have as much. It seems like we really don't have as much power over what becomes law, but we do.
Yeah.
It's just corporations have more power. And until we realize that we need to be leveraging our efforts towards these institutions,
Mm-hmm.
we're going to end up doing what they want us to do, which is fighting each other, right?
Right.
It's, again, submitting to the binary. It becomes distilled to politics in the sense that most Americans are taught. Most Americans are taught that politics means you're either conservative or liberal. So you're either a Republican or a Democrat. And depending on which side you are, you automatically just loathe and hate the other side. And they're your enemy, and they're the reason why everything sucks, and they're why gas prices are high, and they're why eggs are high. When in reality, it really doesn't matter who's in power. Shit's gonna get bad on a trending, on an ever upward scale, because those who are truly in power are those who have the money. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Here's the thing, too. So while politicians and CEOs have the same interest, they both want money and power, which is why they're always in that exchange. They have the same fears. They fear their people. It sounds very like internet. Like there's a time where everyone was watching V for Vendetta.
Oh, yeah.
But it is true. They do fear the people that they see under them.
As they should, but they need to fear. They need to
but
fear
the problem
us more.
is that this is going to be the internal battle. So while we all fundamentally know what we need in this life and want, you can't spend your everyday thinking about those things because you have to go to work. And if you live in the United States, we're at a point now where you work 2 jobs now instead of 1.
Yep.
So you spend most of your day not putting yourself in direct action to the things you want. So when you put that on a massive scale, it can feel like nothing is being done, in the way we would want them to.
Yeah.
And that's kind of why we brought up these cases where it doesn't have to be that way. It does take a lot for a group of people to drop what they're doing and insist on law changes, policy changes and stuff, but it shows you that it's 100% possible. We started from all the boring stuff, right? We were talking about Edison. We were talking about companies that seemingly are like far away, and just a matter of minutes, we got to how that gets to you.
Yeah, it does.
We were talking about how politicians are supposed to be our leaders. They handle the things we don't want to talk about and think about. They do all the boring stuff, and yet it still comes back to you. Whether you voted or not, it comes back to you.
Yeah, it comes back to you. I mean, you can't leave your hands clean from all of the destruction and loss that we as humanity experience, especially as Westerners, especially as Americans, because of the democratic process. And as that veil begins to be lifted, as that illusion of choice becomes more apparent in society, the burden of responsibility becomes so obvious that we're going to be the only ones to get ourselves out of this. You said earlier that, this isn't just a Los Angeles issue. This isn't just a California issue. Flint, Michigan still doesn't have clean water.
Mm-hmm.
They still don't have clean water. And we were
10 years in.
Are we 10 years in?
10 years. I believe it's 2014.
2014. And I remember that was huge. And then, I think everybody kind of just assumed that got fixed.
Yeah.
But it didn't. It never did. And, you have all across the nation. I mean, right now, some state is experiencing an extreme cold front that is insanely cold right now. I don't know where that is. Is it Texas or New York? One of those places.
Oh yeah.
Then you have the hurricane season is longer now. Tornado season is longer now.
New Orleans had snow a couple days ago.
Yeah, they had snowfall. They had a record snowfall.
Yeah, they hadn't had snow in 15 years or so.
Yeah,
and now they have snow.
Every time one of these climate-related disasters happens, nobody walks away from this unscathed. Nobody walks away from this unaffected. Whether you directly experience that disaster or not, that sphere of destruction is just going to get wider and wider and wider. And soon you'll be like us, where for 30 years of our lives, we grew up watching wildfires on the news and seeing the destruction grow. And now it's in our backyard.
Yeah.
Now it's here.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know what's going to happen next year.
And this is LA, mind you. LA is the golden city. Everything's shiny here. The rich people live here.
Yep.
It wasn't supposed to happen here.
No.
It happens elsewhere. The smaller cities, the other states.
The middle of nowhere.
Middle of nowhere. It wasn't supposed to happen here. But we saw the bigger thing at play, where even if you were rich, your entire area is gone. Like people out of state like to poke fun at the Palisades fire, saying that it was mostly composed of rich people and they'll be fine. But take into account, those rich people lost their homes. They weren't supposed to. They live in areas where they have better resources, they're better taken care of, and they still lost it.
Yeah, they still lost it. So how do we get through this? How are we going to get through this? And how is the rest of the nation going to get through their own unique disasters? If the politicians aren't going to act, if they're going to keep taking money from the lobbyists, what are we going to do?
So we now have a new president. Trump is back in office. And you're going to hear a lot of crazy shit in the news or even on social media about how this is happening, this other thing is happening. And they're all objectively bad. And if you're someone who maybe you're well intentioned, like you may not vote, you don't keep up with these things, but you're just watching this and you're like, holy shit. Like maybe you want to do the right thing, but you know for sure that in your mind, Trump's bad. So I have a general distrust in politicians, so I don't want to vote. And that's why I don't vote, or I don't plan on voting in the next election. Based off whatever information you have to go by, that doesn't seem like a plausible thing for you. Let's take voting out of the equation for a second. So you're seeing all this stuff go on. What do you do? What can you do? Where do you start? There's just so much info. And when you look into one thing, there's a billion other things you have to read about. So where do you start?
I think you start by resisting.
Okay.
I think you start with resistance, and this is what I mean by resistance. Resistance can sound like, it's very action oriented, and it can kind of like you might be thinking right now about protesting or, doing something destructive. I'm talking about resistance in the sense of resisting what feels normal to you.
Okay. Like what?
Resistance to me is resisting that norm, resisting that defeatist attitude, resisting that everything around me is so bad.
Yeah.
It's like it's that nihilistic worldview that the world is fucked. I'm powerless. I can't do anything. So I'm just going to be depressed, or I'm just going to, dig trenches into my own comfort and pleasures, into the things that I can control. I think you need to realize that is exactly what those who are in power want you to do. That's how they want you to feel.
Right.
They want you to feel powerless. They want you to feel like you can't do anything.
Yeah.
But resistance to me, ever since October 7th happened and we reached this point where there was this point where all activists online, whether you're a physical activist or you're a virtual activist, there was this point, maybe it was a year after October 7th or I don't know, but there was this point where people just were getting frustrated with themselves and with the government and with those who weren't doing anything at all, with people who were still just living their everyday lives like this wasn't an issue. There was this point of collective frustration and exhaust. I definitely felt it. And at the time I was making posts encouraging people to step away. I was making posts to encourage people to, hey, it's fine to unfollow, certain pages that might be triggering to you. Because I was having conversations with people who are like, it's everywhere. Like I see it everywhere. Their algorithms were curated in a way where they were getting too much information. And that in turn was making them feel way too powerless, or like they weren't doing enough or doing anything at all to advocate against genocide. And during that time, something really like sunk into me. And I like alliterations. I think alliterations are helpful. And so three words really came to me during this time, and it was rest, regroup, rebel.
Solid.
Rest, regroup, rebel. And that just like laid on me. And I try to communicate that as much as I could. Um, Even now, I try to communicate that as much as I could. Like, the only way we're going to get through this is together. And it's going to be tiring and you're going to feel like you can't do anything. But unless you're doing something with other people, you're going to continue to feel that way. I mean, it's all about, the answer to me is community. The answer to me is mutual aid. The answer to me is collective efforts. The answer to me is plural. It's numbers. It's force. It's multiple. It's that collective of doing things together. And until we realize that we have to start organizing, we have to start having conversations, we have to start playing our video games a little less. Doing whatever that could be. I mean, watching TV a little less, consuming media a little less. What were you saying?
Being on your phone less.
Being on your phone less, watching TikTok less, posting on Instagram less. Before we're willing to make those sacrifices of doing a little less of comfort and a little more of the uncomfortable work, things are never going to change. That's why I said the only way we're going to get through this is by resisting. And resistance is first, step number one, resistance is to do something.
Yeah.
To not just do nothing. Resist comfort a little bit. Resist the fear that you get from that awkwardness that you might feel. Resist those things. That in itself is a form of rebellion. That in itself is a form of resistance against this culture of comfort that we've been raised and so deeply, so insanely addicted to.
So let's try to break down just the resistance part. So you're right. We should be self-aware in that moment when we're feeling something and decide to take direct action or not take action. I think you were touching on something interesting where it's all about balance, but we do need to leave our comfort zones. So whenever you're not feeling well, you go to your phone, you go to your game, you go to food, you go to your friend. But sometimes that comfort just comes from that conversation you've been avoiding. So if you have, I'm just going to take it there. So let's say you have a racist uncle. Usually you tend to ignore them. Assuming like everyone in your family are decent people, what happens a lot is like, well, yeah, he's, we don't agree with him, but we're going to just leave him be. We see him once a year, twice a year. You put up with it, and then you move along. The uncomfortable part is examine why they are like that. Because maybe you've never thought of it. You just know this shit's wrong. But now put yourself in that mind frame of trying to figure out what got them there. Why do they feel that way? So that right there, you're not letting the social norm, I guess, overtake you. Usually you just leave it alone. And then maybe even talk to them. Because they're not going to listen to anyone else. They're not going to listen to their coworkers. They're not going to listen to their friends and so on. But in that moment, and the thing is, you may not change their mind. Because it doesn't always, it's not, life isn't a movie. So you may not change their mind. But in this moment, one, you're confronting it sounds cheesy, but their hate to continue onward, unchallenged, right? And then two, they've probably never been confronted directly. Again, your family already ignores it. Their friends maybe don't feel like it's in their place to bring it up, and let alone their coworkers. So they've probably gone unchallenged for however long. So that's a moment where you can examine them as a person and look into those things too, specifically, whatever their prejudice is. There's many places online you can go to where people kind of like sort of address how you can potentially speak to someone, and then you speak to them directly.
Yeah.
Maybe you don't change their mind, but at the very least, you didn't let it continue unchallenged. And maybe they don't change, but they start to think twice about what they're saying, because maybe there'll be consequences. If you start drawing those boundaries of what you're allow and not going to allow, if you draw those lines, eventually they might see, shit, my family may not want to see me if I keep saying this stuff. Right. And what's going to happen when they get older? We all get older. We all need help. I'm all for like disowning people, but everyone's situation is different.
I'm not for disowning, but I do think that context plays a larger role
It does.
in that.
And that's why you should, examine your situation. But that right there, an example of like everyday resistance where something is happening because of a larger issue, and now you have the opportunity to be that shield.
Yeah.
And also too, so as you go along in your little journey of like unlearning things, that's a word you're gonna hear a lot or read a lot if you decide that you've had enough and you want to make that change or those changes in your life. There's a lot we all unlearn, all of us. So much we have to unlearn. You don't have to go that far back. Go watch any movie from the 90s.
Yeah.
They say the F word all the time.
Yeah.
There's a lot of unlearning you have to do. And it takes literally a lifetime to unlearn these things and almost relearn what humanity is supposed to be. Maybe you've taken those steps to do the reading, do the watching, do the confronting. You are going to feel like a lot of weight in you. And so naturally, you're going to go back to your phone, to your game, whatever. Don't have that guilt about it. Just remember, it's all about balance. It's also a defense mechanism. When you're put through just a lot in your life, you go to the things that make you feel better.
Yeah.
Have that balance. You don't need to delete any apps or throw away your phone. Just have that balance of make sure you're putting in the work in your day-to-day life. And then when you need to, go back to your phone.
Yeah. It's fine to do that. I mean, especially if your community is there. I know that a lot of people live in rural areas. They live in communities that are so incredibly polarized or just so incredibly one way that it may be near impossible to physically create those connections in which you can physically build those local support systems. So in that sense, yeah, your phone could be a great tool where you can meet like-minded people and have those conversations and be in connection with somebody who could just hold space for you or be empathetic towards you. But don't think that just because it hasn't been easy to find that in real life, that it doesn't exist. I think oftentimes we can just take a look around us and be like, well, my city is really conservative or whatever, so there's not going to be anybody here. And they just give up, and they'll just default to online, and existing online. The world is a big place. It's a big place. And people are much more varied than you think. You know what I mean? And that's why I think this is twofold. Resistance is twofold. It's first resisting that hyper independency that you've been raised up in, and second, it's resisting with other people, because that's where most of the work is going to get done. That's where you get mutual aid. That's where you get grassroots. That's where you get stronger local support systems. And we saw that here in Los Angeles. We saw that in the immediate days following these wildfires.
Right.
Again, we talked about it last episode.
Mm-hmm.
We were turned away for hours to volunteer. Everybody showed up. Everybody came through from other communities to help. And so it wasn't just this, it wasn't only people from Pasadena. It was from people all over SoCal. I was seeing online people from OC coming in. And where I work, I was seeing faces I've never seen before, not from my city, there to grab coffee or whatever, because they were going to go off to volunteer. And that doesn't happen by waiting for some governing body to tell you to do it. These people decided on their own, or they saw a post online, or they saw another grassroots organization online who said, hey, we're doing this. We need help, come through. All of those things exist, or if they don't, you could be the very person to start that. You know what I mean?
Chances are, too, there's a saying, if there's one, there's others.
Yeah.
So we're going to address a lot of this conversation as if, we're speaking to someone who lives in, a small town, or maybe just a very conservative area. So you might feel like you're the only one in your area who, at the very least, questions the things around them. You may not be as racist as your family or friends, or homophobic. So be the person that is trying to light that beacon like the way Batman would. He has that bat signal.
Yeah.
You can try to be that person where you're like, I'm not homophobic. So if you're not homophobic and you live in this area, what's up?
Straight up.
Like
Straight
I'm
up.
here. Or maybe you are queer. You don't need to give me your personal info, but like I'm here. What's up?
Yeah.
Let's be friends.
Yeah.
Let's talk.
I know some of the ways that I've used the internet to find like-minded people in these efforts. I have two really useful tools. One is Discord. You could use Reddit or you could use Google to look up Discord servers for the closest major city. Like here in SoCal, we have there's like an official SoCal Discord that is full of,
I didn't know that.
yeah. Not a lot of people know this. And you have to like verify with your ID. Like it's structured in a way that is very safe.
Emphasize that.
Very, very safe. Like I had to verify with my ID
Dude.
because to enter this server, you have to give up a sense of security, quote unquote security. They have to see my ID that I'm who I am.
Yeah.
I have to send them a picture that it matches my ID because because when I entered into that space, I entered into that space knowing that I was going to be held accountable for anything I said on that server. So if I'm going to be in that server, my intentions better be good.
Right.
And so this server had thousands and thousands of people all across SoCal, primarily like OC and the San Gabriel Valley and greater LA. But it was primarily like 95% people of color. Again, it's not a bad thing. It doesn't have to be all people of color. It doesn't have to be all white people, whatever. That was a benefit to me as a person of color myself. It was a benefit to be around other people who had similar experiences and similar shortcomings as myself. And through that group, I mean, there were endless opportunities for a community. They were constantly having public meetups at like a boba shops or tea shops or coffee shops. There was different niches within that community, like board games, gardening, gym rats, gaming. I mean, you name it. Those things exist. You just got to look for them. You got to do a little bit of digging around. You know what I mean? It's not hard though. I'm pretty sure anybody listening to this is far more skilled in using the internet than I am. You know what I mean? Than we are. Even though we're not that old. I mean, just yeah.
I mean, we're almost dead.
Anybody in their 20s and younger is going to have this insane knowledge of how to navigate the internet. For me, I used Reddit and I used Discord. And, as shitty as Reddit is
can be.
As shitty as Reddit can be, there definitely exists a lot of wholesome groups on there. And those can be local too. So there's definitely local Los Angeles and whatever communities that are near me right now. I could go into those communities and at least post like a post saying what I'm looking for. Like, hey, I'm looking for a friend who's blah, 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 blah. And I would definitely advise a stronger sense of discernment when you're on somewhere like Reddit because it's much more public. And there is no accountability. There's no verification in the sense of that
Right.
Discord had. But you will still find communities within Reddit where in order to post, you have to be verified. You have to verify yourself. So that all changes from community to community. But if you just wanted a place to start on where to look to find IRL friends, yeah, you can utilize Reddit and Discord to get you going somewhere.
Thing is too, like, we're all sneaky in some way or another. For the most part, you're sneakier when you're like in high school or middle school. So use those skills to not get yourself in trouble by your conservative parents.
That's why I said I'm always like disowning for me is always the very, very last tool that I want to use.
Yeah.
Because a lot of us are still very interconnected with our families.
Right.
And like for some of us, it really is homelessness or,
yeah.
Suffer a little more under these people I don't like. And that is where I think it's important to practice self-love and to really have a strong sense of identity. Because at the end of the day, no one is going to define me except me. You know what I mean? And if there's one thing I hate so much in life, it's for people to tell me what I believe in, people to tell me who I am. My family loves to do that.
No, damn.
The biggest fights that I've had with any member of my family being back home now, post-divorce, has been political. It's just been political because for whatever reason, they've just assumed that they know what I think politically, and it's a shame. It's a shame. It's just because of how young I am, and it's just because I'm not outspoken in ways that they politically are.
But also too, this is the important part where this is where allies, like true allies, come into the picture right here. So if you're not the gay person and you are the white person, this is the part where like you do have to like have that aroma around you that lets people know that you're okay to talk to. Especially if you live in those crazy ass red states and you are an ally. That's one thing you can do. Like just give off that fucking aura that you're cool to talk to, especially like online. Because in those areas, I'm pretty sure that people are going to be too afraid to let themselves be seen in that way. So someone comes across, and more than likely, someone will see your account online. Because that's how this whole thing works. And as always, when you meet people, you build that trust. You build that trust with your friends. So this will be no different. But no one knows everything. So that's another reason why you should go to someone else and say, hey, what do you think of this? I saw this on the news, saw this on TikTok or whatever. What do you make of all that? And let's say you don't live in a crazy ass area, then what's stopping you from like just talking to people, you know?
Be open to finding people and be open to having your own worldview challenged.
Oh, there we go. There we go.
Yeah. Be open to having your worldview challenged and expanded, knowing that it's going to benefit you much more than the feeling of discomfort that it takes to go through that.
It's a process.
It's a process, yeah. And it takes a lot of grace, and it takes a lot of patience and forgiveness and denying of yourself. And you mentioned earlier about unlearning. You said something like that?
Yeah, unlearning.
And so, not only do we have to deconstruct a lot of the beliefs or the binary that we grew up in, we also have to deconstruct a lot of our own personal biases that
we all have. All
we
of us.
all have.
We all do.
We all have. And this is one of the biggest issues with people who are into self-love and they're into mental health advocacy, is that they become so inundated with therapy speak that they inadvertently end up using psychological terms or therapy speak as a defense mechanism or as an excuse to not become better people.
Okay, elaborate on that. Elaborate on that.
Because that just has to go with, again, the people you meet. Like, if somebody challenges you, it's so easy to just think like, oh, this person is toxic. This person isn't, they don't love me or they don't know what's best for me. It's really hard. I just feel like as Americans, at least, we have developed such a sense of superiority that to be proven wrong is so embarrassing, so shameful that there's no way, shame or embarrassment can exist apart from wrong intentions. That's all I mean. I just mean like, check yourself, man. Really think about what you're saying. You know what I mean?
And it's okay to not know everything.
Yeah.
Too.
Yeah.
Yeah. So whenever someone says to you, oh, you shouldn't use that word anymore. And maybe it's a word you don't see a problem with.
Yeah.
You said it a billion times. You said it around almost everyone you've ever known. Like, you don't see the problem with the word. It's okay to take a step back and be like, all right, I'm going to stop for now. And I'm just going to think about this. Hear that person out. Ask them, like, why. And even if their opinion still hasn't swayed you, just sit with it. Go online. See if there's any info. Most of the time there is. There's going to be a lot of information as to why you can't use that word. There's usually history to it. So in that moment, it's okay to don't look at it as like a win or lose kind of thing. Like what you said just now. You don't always have to be right, and that's all right.
Yeah.
And
Right.
that's kind of the problem with therapy speak. It has this intersection with like the astrology people where they've read just a tiny amount of information online that for the most part is correct, but they don't have the full scope of whatever this is that they're reading. So they seemingly know more than someone else does. And unintentionally, they kind of like develop an ego around that.
Yes.
One example you just use is like, oh, you're being toxic to me. And like, that can happen sometimes, but that's a strong word. And just because, like, let's say, and I've seen this happen personally, you'll be disagreed with, and the person will say, oh, you're being toxic to me. Like, they're not being toxic to you. They just don't agree with whatever you just said.
Right. That's fine. It's okay to have disagreements.
Yeah. And also, but along with that, so maybe you don't have access to a therapist, then really put in the time to learn all these terms that you're hearing. So being toxic, self-love, and just like we are now, it'll eventually make its way back into society and politics and stuff.
Yeah.
Very quickly. You'll see it happen very quickly.
Yeah. But if you can't afford a therapist, fucking get a therapist.
Yeah. If you can, definitely. If your insurance covers it or whatever,
yeah.
do it.
If you don't think you need one,
but you can afford one, do it.
Yeah, if you don't
do a
think you
trial
need one,
run,
but you can afford one, it's really helpful just to understand your like thought process and just to think, But that's a whole different
yeah,
topic.
I guess we can't touch on that too much.
And I could still talk about like more skills when it comes to community building and whatnot. But I think that I should save that for a different time.
Okay.
I think we've said enough here in this episode, at least, about the groundwork for how we can get through this together, especially with
each other.
Next 4 years.
Each other.
With each other.
Because someone else knows something you don't know. Someone else has access to something you don't. You know what I mean? They have a car, you don't. They have a parent that owns a grocery store and you don't. There's a ton of shit. So we do need one another in these times of peril. Are we looking to go on to the next section?
No, dude, I think that's it.
Really?
Yeah, that's it, dude. That's it. That's the episode.